California, Mr. Bond.
Here we go again.
Hello.
Hello, it's Neil McNally and Steve Kilcullen here for the To Live and Let Die in LA podcast. What is this, episode 6?
I think this is episode 6 now.
6.
Yeah.
Okay. If I'm wrong, please forgive me. Don't write us. It's fine. It's just a mistake on my part. So
It's just a number.
well, here we are again. Just a brief introduction, just a little recap. What happened this week, Steve?
Oh my goodness, man. We had the best time on Tuesday night at the
we
Culver
did.
Theater. Our
Great.
screening of The Living Daylights was a huge
Yeah, it was bigger
smash.
than Dr. No. I was very
Yeah.
very happy with that. So
Packed house. And
yeah,
guys, thank you for coming
thank
out.
you. Yeah, you came out.
We really can't do this without you guys.
Yeah.
This doesn't happen without you guys filling that theater. So bravo.
Yeah. We don't want to come and like 10 people are there because but that has not been happening. So
Yeah, and it's
Thank you.
and how exciting was it to watch that movie on the big screen?
it's great. Yeah, it was pure Timothy Dalton. So I mean, you can't beat that really. So
And the music was pumping, and
Yeah.
I mean the soundtrack sounded phenomenal
yeah, it
in
did.
that space. I kept finding myself like doing that to the John
Yeah.
Barry score, and yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I've been driving today and I've been playing it in my car. So
Oh,
that's been-
nice.
yeah, it's a good one.
Speaking of movie scores, we'll address this real quick because we've had a few people bring this up. At the end of the movie, when we went to sit down for our Q&A, accidentally the volume was lowered while the credits were playing, and a few
Well,
people
I think
said,
they turned
"Hey."
the movie off. I think they just faded the whole film out. So
Well, I looked up.
Oh, I-
'cause
oh,
when
I could be wrong.
I looked
Sorry,
up and I
yeah.
saw the credits were still rolling, and they went all
Okay.
the way at the end. But yeah, the soundtrack was lowered.
yeah, sorry about that,
And
folks.
yeah, sorry guys, that was it was not intentional on anybody's part. The
It's
theater
hard to control
hours,
everything. So
Yeah,
I mean,
it was. We're still figuring it all out, but the good news is that won't happen again.
yeah, it's we live and learn, and then we take notes for the next one, and then we'll
Yeah,
pass things on. I know some people had expressed they wanted to see James Bond will return, which I can't blame them. So,
yeah.
but we had a great guest, Richard Shankman, writer and director and father of Bond fandom. He was great. That was a great.
Oh.
I mean, it was really fun with him.
That's
So.
fantastic. I think one of my best memories of that night is during the pre-show when Timothy Dalton and Mae West are singing Captain and Tennille.
Yeah.
I looked over at Richard, and he had the biggest smile on his face.
Oh, that's
Like,
great.
He was loving it, and and everybody too. Everybody was getting a kick out of the whole thing, and it just it just made me feel giddy.
It was a good vibe. It was a really good vibe. And he, I mean, he's well documented in magazines talking about, well, he founded the magazine Bondage in 1974, which he's going to come and do a podcast, so he'll talk about this again.
Yeah.
But it was the first James Bond fan club really ever.
Yeah.
So, and he was 16, so he talked about the history of that and how that led to him meeting Cubby Broccoli and being on the film sets and meeting Timothy Dalton. And he really wrote it about as far as like a 16-year-old could go. I mean, he got older as it went on, but I mean, he's written that to like a very successful film career as well. So we're just very lucky that he wanted to come and speak, and could have been.
And he was able to, take a lot of that knowledge and that love for Bond and filmmaking and become a brilliant filmmaker himself. With movies like The Man from Earth, The Pompatus of Love. That was a movie I loved in college.
Yeah.
And so it was exciting to just get to hang out with him and talk with him.
And I think it was just fun for him just to be like a fan again and just watch a Bond film. And we had him sign our Bondage issues for the Living Daylights, and that was really fun. So it was really good. He's one of those people that when I first got, and I told him this, so I always tell these people when we meet him my personal experiences with them. But when I first got into Bond as a teen, I would read books like Raymond Benson's Bedside Companion, and I believe he's mentioned in that. And I would hear about him like on the fringes, like Bondage, and Bondage was done at that point, so I didn't actually read it when it was out, but I read back issues, but also about the history, and it was just really nice to say wow, I thank you for coming here and speak, and guys like that need to we need to talk about them because they're like the first people that
absolutely
made it possible for
what,
us.
yeah,
Yeah,
what we do and what the 007 Great Britain fan club does,
yeah,
and the
and
German club, the Swiss club,
the
events like
Ireland club.
Gatherall.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
The Ireland
they're
club.
all born of Richard Schenkman's uh,
Yeah,
original idea of kind of,
with his mom,
yeah,
with
with
his
his
mom in the
mom.
basement. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. He printed out like mimeographed magazines for a bit. Then it became a proper magazine.
yeah.
Um, I have a copy here somewhere, but every time I hold something up, it doesn't show.
It
So
kind of
I don't.
disappears. Yeah, I
Yeah,
had my
yeah,
bond. We both had the Living Daylights
yeah,
bondage
yeah,
issue signed by Richard that night to
yeah.
commemorate the night for us. So
But it was good. He had a good time, and we got our pictures taken with him, and he had such a good
yeah,
time. We asked him to come on the podcast, and he was like, "Yeah, I'd love to." So,
yeah,
a future date, he'll come on and
yeah. I
talk
think
more.
he'll be our next guest because
Yeah,
hopefully he could be our next guest because it would be good to kind of have that still fresh in
yeah,
our minds too with
yeah,
the screening and everything. And
yeah,
before we move on and introduce today's guest,
yeah.
Neil and I are kitted out a little bit in some cabana wear
yeah, some tropical gear.
because the next movie we're showing in July is going to be Thunderball,
Yay!
60th anniversary
Yeah,
screening,
it's gonna be
and our
good.
special guest, Fiona Volpe herself, Luciana Paluzzi, is going to
Yay!
be there, and she's going to do a
She'll be
Q&A
signing. She'll be
with
signing.
Stephen J. Rubin is returning
Yeah,
to run the Q&A with Luciana, and she's
it'll be good.
also going to be signing autographs. Now
Yeah,
that got to let everybody know right off the bat. The autographs are going to be a separate price
yeah.
from your movie ticket because
It's
those
for charity.
yes,
It's
that money is going to go to charity.
yeah,
So, and well, the closer we get to this, that's not until July. So the closer
yeah,
we get to the screening, where there's going to be more info and more fun stuff we'll be talking about. But just let you guys know. But
yeah.
who
It's
do
gonna
we
be a
have
good night.
today?
We have Raymond Benson, esteemed author Raymond Benson, but also known as one of the most successful authors of James Bond as well.
Yeah.
So, and he has a new book out in the James Bond universe, starring James Bond's best friend Felix Leiter, that came out this week actually on
The
was it the
Hook in the
20th?
Eye.
Yeah, Hook in the Eye. So he is obviously making the rounds on podcasts, and
Yeah.
we were more than happy to have him come and speak with us. We asked him; he was very gracious and
Yeah.
super nice, very nice guy. Another person that I've been reading about my whole Bond life, so I was
Yeah.
very happy because I
I and also, I mean, I'm like I said in our interview with episode with John Cox, I'm still a babe in the woods when it comes to the continuation
yeah,
novels. So I'm not so familiar with Raymond Benson's Bond work, but I am very familiar with his video game work, specifically Dark Seed. He did Stephen King's The Mist, which was
yeah,
a text-based game. When I was a kid, apart from the Atari, we had an Apple IIe computer,
mm,
the monochrome green. So, and we had a lot of those games,
yeah,
and then later in the '90s, I got into Ultima with some friends of mine,
yeah,
and I still play games like that. So, getting to talk to Raymond was
yeah.
real treat.
For me, and of course I've read some of his Bond novels as well, but for me, he stands out. When I'm just going to tell my history again, but when growing up as a teenager in Chicago, we were in vacation in Rhode Island, where my family's from, and my dad bought me a set of Bond novels that were at a thrift store we were at. So I started to read the books, and then I went to the Harold Washington Library in
Mm,
Chicago, where we lived, and I started to check out as much as I could about Fleming and Bond, and Raymond Benson's The James Bond Bedside Companion was there.
yeah.
Everything else was listed as being there, but wasn't there. So I guess that they lost them, and but that was there, and I was able to check. I checked that thing out for like a year straight, I think, and
Oh, nice.
it's a great book. It's out of print, but it's very easy to find.
Yeah.
It's the original. It's one of the original Bibles. It's not the first book, but it's the most detailed.
Hmm.
And Raymond will talk about it in
Yeah.
the interview. He definitely spoke to Fleming's friends. He was definitely the first one to document all of Fleming's history, which hadn't been documented for the most part. There were
Yeah.
some biographies, but he was able to really get into the family and talk with them and stuff. So that
He
was really
really
cool.
had great
Yeah.
access. And again, yeah, you'll hear him.
And we also
Which is
conducted this
great.
on Fleming's birthday, so it was very timely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was kind of the perfect day to do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mark O'Connell from Catching Bullets had a great little turn of phrase regarding Raymond and the Hook in the Eye coming out, he's referred to it as paperback Leiter.
Yeah.
So I thought that was great. So and so the whole time we were talking to Raymond, I kept hearing that Beatles riff,
Oh yeah.
little guitar riff in my head. So
I
looking
I
forward
got to
to
pick
it.
it up. Well, the first part's out this week. I have to
Mhm.
read it though. So,
Yeah.
but it's supposedly really good, and I don't doubt it because he's a great
Oh yeah.
um, writer. Just a really nice guy. You know, it's always really. I mean, I've done interviews with different people, not just in Bond and also in other things, and it's always very helpful to have somebody who is nice and generous with their time and just laid
Yeah.
back. And he definitely was. It was like just having a regular conversation. So it was
Yeah.
super fun. So
And as you'll see, you can tell he loves this, and he loves what he
yeah.
does, and he loves Bond.
Yeah, definitely loves Bond, that's for sure. So, okay, so should we play it,
Yeah. Without further ado,
Mr.
here we go.
Raymond Benson? Hello, here we are once again for the To Live and Let Die in LA podcast.
Hello,
With
everybody.
Hi,
And our
Steve.
special guest today,
I'm
Raymond
Neil.
Benson.
Yeah, Raymond Benson is our esteemed guest, which I'm very happy about. So thank you for being here. So it's you
Hi,
have
everybody, and thank you, Neil and Steve, for having me.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you
a
so
special
much.
day because it's Fleming's birthday as well. So it's kind of a nice day to be, doing a Bond thing. So we're very happy. So, um,
That's right.
yeah. So I guess I know you've talked. Let's just start with the bedside companion, which for me was one of the first things that I ever read about Bond, and it was the first time that I saw a picture of Fleming and Goldeneye and all of that. So your book was kind of the intro to me after I had read some of the novels. So if you could talk about how did you write it? How did you put it together? If you could just talk a bit about the history of that. So
Well, I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and I saw all all the movies on the big screen. Uh, Originally, I mean, Goldfinger was the first one I saw, but then right after that, Doctor No and From Russia with Love came out as a double bill within 6 months. So, and I was 9 years old. So I saw the first three movies on the big screen, right off the bat when I was nine. And so that had a huge impact on me back then, growing up in a small town in West Texas. So I was immediately a fan, and I started reading the books even at that age. Even and some of the material probably went over my head, but I grasped the stories, well enough. And of course, I've reread the books over and over and over the years. But I kept up with the film series and just stayed a true fan, for the most part. But I became a real person and a normal person, and
what?
went to college
No.
and studied theater. And after college, I went to New York City, and I was had a career in theater as a stage director and a music composer, and I did a lot of that for many years. And then we come to the early '80s, and I'd been a little disillusioned with Bond in the late '70s. I won't go into that, but you'll understand why.
Yes, I can
Uh,
guess. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there were a couple of catalysts in 1981. The first one was John Gardner's first novel was published, License Renewed, and
Mm.
then like a month later, 2 months later, For Your Eyes Only came out. And I thought For Your Eyes Only, I could recognize more Fleming material in that, and
Hmm.
and I, it kind of excited me again.
Hmm.
And I started reading all the books again.
Oh, cool.
Um, and then I've told this story a lot on podcasts, but
It's
some
fine. You
friends of
can.
mine and I were sitting around a table that summer or late summer, sometime like that, and the question came up: what would you write if you had to write a book? And we all took turns, and I said, well, I'd want to write like a coffee table book, a history of James Bond, you know. And at that time, there wasn't anything like that. There
Yeah.
was a couple of books on the movies. There was Stephen J. Rubin's great book and John Brosnan's great book. Uh, there were some biographies of Ian Fleming. They were out of print, from the 60s. There were a few books about the novels that were out of print from the 60s. I wanted something that combined all of that into one big tome, a biography of Fleming, a history of the phenomenon, and critiques and analyses of all the books and all the films up to that point. And, I wanted that on my bookshelf. So the only way I was going to get that is I was going to have to write it. And, my friends who knew me, they all said, yeah, you should do that. You know a lot about James Bond, but I'd never written a book before.
Yeah.
I investigated a good friend of mine had published a joke book.
Okay.
And I said, how'd you do that? How'd you get around to do that? And he kind of told me the process, and he offered to introduce me to his editor at a New York publisher. And I told her what I wanted to do, and she went, that is a really good idea. What you need is a proposal. And I'll give you this outline of how to write a book proposal. And you do that and bring it back to me. We'll see what happens. So I did and brought it back. It took me, a couple of weeks to do that. And I brought it back to her. And I got a contract to write the book overnight.
Wow. Wow. That's impressive.
But then it took 3 years.
Yeah.
It took 3 years. Yeah, there it is.
There's right there. Wow. Yeah, it's a little bit there. Yeah, yeah. So
yeah, that's the first edition.
Yeah.
But I did go to England to meet and interview a lot of Ian Fleming's family and friends and colleagues, and did the same in America who I could find. But back then a lot of these people were still alive. Yeah. So I became friends with Ernest Cuneo, and I met Ivor Bryce and Robert Harling and Fleming's nephew and stepdaughter, Kingsley Amis.
How did you find them, and how did you gain their trust at that time?
Well, the first person I found was Al Hart. And he was the editor at Macmillan, who edited the American editions of the first 7 books while they were being published by Macmillan. And he was still in New York. So I tracked him down and talked to him, and he gave me several names like Ernest Cuneo and a woman named Claire Blanchard, who was one of Fleming's close friends. He knew her from the war, but she also worked for Fleming in capacities in the newspaper business after the war. And she was in England. He also gave me how to contact Naomi Burton, who was Fleming's American agent. And so I contacted Cuneo and Claire Blanchard and Naomi Burton, and it just sort of started, expanding from there. Claire Blanchard was extremely helpful. She finally said, you've got to come over to England and I will, give you introductions to all these people. I'll get you in to see Ivor Bryce and Robert Harling and people like that, and Kingsley Amis and John Pearson, because she knew all these people.
Oh, wow.
And Ernest Cuneo was fantastic. He lived in Washington, D.C., and we became pretty close friends until he died in 1988. But after the book, I got him to write the introduction to the book.
Yeah.
And he did it. And we were pretty close friends after that. And he would call me on the phone practically every week.
Wow.
I think he was lonely. And we talked a lot. And I stayed with Ivor Bryce over a weekend, and he would pull out, stacks of letters from Ian Fleming, and I'd get to go through them and stuff. And it was quite a time. Believe me, I felt like I was walking in Ian Fleming's footsteps, and it was just it was a very exciting time. And meanwhile, I was still at a day job, trying to make a living, and still doing theater at night and weekends. So that's why I guess it took 3 years. It was just a long, drawn out process. My publisher probably thought I never turned it in, but I did. And it was published in 1984. And that kind of turned my life in a different direction that I never thought I would be going in
Mhm.
is in as that of a writer.
Yeah.
And almost immediately after that came the computer gaming world
Mhm.
that I quite literally fell into,
Mhm.
but it was because a company was doing a couple of James Bond games, and I had a literary agent who had been approached by them for looking for a writer, and he thought of me.
Oh, wow.
So that got me into writing computer games, and that's where I really honed my fiction writing
Mhm.
and creating these, very complicated and huge role playing type plots and stories and characters and dialogue for games up into the mid '90s.
What
And that was a really long answer for your
No,
yeah,
it's a great
it's
answer.
single
great.
first
It's amazing.
question.
No, it's a great. No,
And
please talk.
I have a question about that. Like going from the companion, which is like nonfiction, and how what's the writing process like in doing something like that compared to doing a video game where I guess you got to have different branching kind of options, and then going into a straight narrative story like in one of your books. Is
Yeah.
is
Yeah,
one
they're
harder than
very
the other?
well, it's three very different writing processes. For
Mm.
nonfiction, it's more about research and trying to tell a narrative in the nonfiction tale. I mean, uh, with the bedside companion, there is a story that goes with the history of the phenomenon, but then with the writing about the books and the movies, that's more of a critique, more of a critic kind of thing,
Mm.
where you're trying to analyze what they did and did it work, did it not work, that kind of thing. It was more subjective, I guess.
Okay.
um, I was into games in the '80s. Well, I'd always been into games, especially board games, but I was one of the few initial players of Dungeons and
Oh,
Dragons,
wow.
in the
Very
late
nice.
'70s. So I was into the pencil and paper thing, and then I had met the guys who were doing the James Bond role playing game, the
Mhm.
pencil and paper one,
Mm.
because they were based in New York, and I started playing that when it came out. So I was very familiar with that, and they knew I was doing the bedside companion. It hadn't been published yet, but they asked me. I said, would I be interested in writing an adventure module for that game? And I said, yes, I would. So that was kind of in the works before the bedside companion was even published.
Oh wow. I
Um,
remember the ads for that game in I used to read Starlog magazine like when we were kids. We
Yeah.
that was like where we got all of our info from, and there was always the big colorful full page ad for the world of James Bond. And they had like, and View to a Kill was just coming out, so
right.
when I saw these ads, and it had like the View to a Kill module and the Doctor No module, and it was kind of my introduction to a lot of the other titles that weren't the newer movies.
Right,
Like,
right.
oh,
Yeah,
Doctor No.
the first two they did was Octopussy and Goldfinger, I believe.
Hmm.
Uh, were the first two. I know Octopussy was. Goldfinger might have been. Um, but yeah, so and then the computer games, I was really into the Infocom text adventure games like Zork. I don't know if
Mhm.
Hmm.
you are familiar with
I've
those.
heard
They
the
were
name. Yeah,
very
yeah.
popular. They were very popular in the '80s. Um, they were, they're story based, all text,
Yeah.
where you read the description of where you are, and it says, you can go east or path through the forest to the east or down the hill to the west. Oh, and there's a sword on the ground. What do you do? And you type, pick up the sword. It says, you now have a sword. What do you do? Go
I
down
remember
the
you had to be
hill
real
west.
specific too with that, because the instructions they give you with those games said you can only really use these phrases. If you kind of get too specific or you don't,
Yeah,
use they'll go, I don't understand. Because we had a Star Trek game that was just like that when I was a kid,
yeah.
and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was by Infocom, Hitchhiker's Guide. That was one of their first ones, and their parser got more sophisticated as
Mm.
time went on in the '80s. They kind of fizzled out by 1990
Yeah.
because then graphics came in
Yeah.
and computer games became much more sophisticated and more visual. But anyway, um, so I was used to playing those games, so I knew how they worked. I knew how to kind of structure them. And they're a lot like the role-playing game too, because even though that's paper and pencil, you still have, multiple paths and improvisation that you can do when you're
Mm.
playing one of those role-playing games. So you just sort of translate that into writing the script for a computer game.
Mm.
And yeah, the script was very long because you had to have multiple paths. You have the straight, the correct path. That's the main script, but then you have all these sort of side paths to go on, should the player decide to do that. And after I did those, I got hired by other computer game companies. I worked for, three or four
Mhm.
and did some pretty high profile games like Ultima 7, The Black Gate, and Are You Afraid of the Dark and Dark Seed 2. And,
Yes.
but
Yes.
so I was working. It's what brought me to the Chicagoland area.
Oh,
I
okay.
was working for a company called Viacom New Media, and it was 1995, um, around the first week in November, and I got a call from Peter Jansen Smith, who was the chairman of what was then called Glidrose Publications. It's now Ian Fleming Publications. Peter Jansen Smith was Ian Fleming's literary agent, British
Mhm.
literary agent, and he controlled all the books, basically, the literary business. Um, and John Gardner was writing the books at that time. But he called, and we knew each other from the Bedside Companion. We met
Mhm.
when I did in my initial trip to England back in '82, I guess it was. Um, and he liked the book when it came out. The Flemings liked the book when it came out. So I was on their radar. I had also written a first novel, a mystery,
Mhm.
in the late '80s, 1980s. Um, and I let him read it. I said, "Could you read my novel?" And he read it, and he had some nice things to say about it
Mhm.
and some constructive things. But we both agreed this is the proverbial first novel you stick in a drawer, and it never comes out. But I think he saw that not only could I start a novel, but I could finish it,
Mhm.
which is a big thing. A lot of people start novels and never finish them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then I was honing all my fiction. He knew I was doing all these big computer games and stuff like that. So he called me out of the blue in November and he said, "Raymond, John Gardner has said he wants to retire from the Bond novels. And I wanted to know if would you like to give it a shot?"
Wow. Sure. Why not?
Well, it
I
was,
got to
I
think
know.
about that for a minute. Sure.
I was, totally flabbergasted. This was not anything I was campaigning for or asked
Mhm.
for or even had on my radar. But of course I had to say, well, I'll
Of
give it a
course.
shot,
Yeah.
Um, and I had to kind of audition. I had to come up with a plot and do an outline, and that had to be approved by Glidrose as well as the British publisher and the American publisher because they already had a deal with both publishers to do Bond novels that existed with the John Gardner books. And once that was done, I would have to write the first four chapters
Mhm.
on spec for the same approval with the same approval process.
Hmm.
So we talked a little bit about, what direction should we go in? Should I just continue on from John Gardner,
Mhm.
keep it contemporary? Should I go back in the past, the 60s or the 50s, do stories back then? But then GoldenEye came out
Mhm.
that same month. And it was such a big hit. It was pretty much a reboot at the time.
Mhm.
And he said, why don't we keep it in sync with the movies? Let's make your M a woman as
Mhm.
well. And we'd like you to actually make your books a little more cinematic,
Mhm.
more kind of, he didn't want to say, make them like the movies, but just make them a little more humor, a little more action. I think he was saying, make them a little bit more like the movies.
Yeah, probably.
And
In so many words, yeah.
and I said, I want to keep my Bond very much Fleming's Bond. I want him to have all of his vices, smoking and drinking and womanizing and all that. And he said, yeah, absolutely. Make it work. If you can make it work, let's do all that.
How do
So
you
that's what I did. And so I knew that the first book, if it was published, it would be 1997. So I came up with the Hong Kong plot, and he approved that, and I wrote the outline, wrote the first 4 chapters, and I got the gig.
Wow.
So
that's impressive.
I know. Well, it's a very unorthodox
Sounds like it.
way of getting into publishing.
Yeah.
And I don't take it for granted. It was quite remarkable. And I've used that same process to do an outline before every book I've ever written, because it really helps. In the writing business, they say you're either a plotter, like me, or you're a pantser. You write by the seat of your pants. And I don't know how those guys
I'm a
do
bit
it,
of
but
both.
there are some
I'm a bit of both.
very talented pantsers. Stephen King is a pantser.
Yeah, okay.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, Lee Child is a pantser. And there's a lot of but there's a lot of plotters too. Jeffrey Deaver is a plotter. And I have to know where I'm headed. I need to know how it's going to end. I need to know, all the twists and the turns and the red herrings before I start writing.
Yeah.
So, and I work all that out in the outline. It can be that's the hardest part for me. It's doing like a 20-page single-spaced prose treatment is really what it is.
Wow.
And all the hair pulling and the angst and the being up at night and wondering, how am I going to get him out of this, and that kind of thing. That all happens in the outline phase. And then once that's done and everything's approved, it's kind of like the blueprints of the novel. It's the roadmap.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I can't improvise while I'm writing. I just know that these plot points have to come at this juncture. And it's very much a 3-act structure, and that's how I've always worked.
How do you get
the outline is? Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. I was gonna ask, like, how did you approach getting into the psyche of James Bond? Like, did doing the games help you write for him, or how did you go about that?
That's a tough question. Like I said, I'd been reading the novels ever since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And seeing all the movies.
Yeah.
I didn't find it difficult.
Okay.
What was difficult was writing British at first. I was actually required to write as if I was British, using all the British terms and spellings and things like that. So, the first book, the second book, there was a lot of vetting by the editors on that side of the pond to take out some Americanisms and things like that. But by the third book, I was writing British, and I did go to England a lot while I was doing this. I would, 4 times a year at least, spending some time in England. And I would travel to all the locations too that I was writing about for the research. I would usually do that after the outline was done.
Oh, wow.
That's when I would do some preliminary research on where I wanted to set everything, what locations within a country I wanted to go to or have Bond go to, or the story needed. So then I would go there to see these places and eat the food and stay in the hotels and jump out of airplanes without a parachute.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh, sorry. I'm not Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
And so, then you'd come back and you'd write the book, and you have your outline, you have your research, you have your notes from the trip. Then, writing the book was relatively easy, except, it was tedious. It took about 4 months, but you weren't grappling with the story while you're writing. And I think that can slow people down.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm a big fan of the outline plotting bit.
What's your like day when you're writing, when you're doing any project, what's your like day-to-day routine like to keep the train rolling?
I like to write a scene a day.
Mm.
That is, it's a scene that has a beginning and an end. It might be part of a chapter. It might be a whole chapter.
Mm.
It could be 2 pages long. It could be 20 pages long. But I
Mm.
want to get that full scene, a first draft of that full scene on in one day. And that could be, it might take me 2 hours. It might take me 7 hours,
Mhm.
Mm.
depending on the scene. But if once I do that, then the next day I do another one, and then the next day I do the next one. And I always just like Ian Fleming, I would do a complete first draft without looking back,
Mm.
and that establishes a pace and a forward movement, momentum going.
Mhm.
I think if you like say you write a chapter and then you start revising it over and over and
Yeah.
over, you get stuck. You just kind of go, oh, I can't move on.
Get
And that's
trapped
why
in
a
that
lot of
idea and perfection and
Yeah.
yeah. You save that for later. Get through the first draft of the novel first.
Yeah.
Get it done. And even if it's a mess and if it, and very first drafty, forget it. Just get the story down. Get it done.
I also noticed that
Then,
writers that write like that, specifically Fleming, when you read him, you can tell that he's a fast writer,
Mm.
oh yeah,
and that somehow kind of just makes those stories zip by too.
that's right. Well, he would write the first draft in 2 months at Goldeneye. Every January and February of the year. He would write the first draft and not look back and then take the draft back with him to England. And that's when he would revise and do any rewrites and all that stuff. And that's what I do. And that is the most fun for me personally,
Mm.
is after the first draft is done, going back and starting from the beginning of the book
Mhm.
and going through it again. And by then, what you wrote in the first chapter, that was 5 months ago,
Yeah.
and you're reading it and going, God, did I write this? You know, and it's fresher. You can see the flaws or what's good, and
Mm.
and you can do a better job of revising and fixing things. Also, stuff from writing the third act of little pieces of foreshadowing or something that you need to stick into the beginning,
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's why it's a good way to do it.
Yeah. What made you stop writing all of the books? Because you did six, right? Am I correct?
I did
Yeah.
6 originals and three
Yeah. The
movie
novels.
novelizations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What made you stop? I'm just curious.
That was it. That
Okay.
was the number in the contract.
Oh, was
They
okay.
like to, you know, um, hire a different writer and
Mhm.
stop, and then bring in somebody else and stop, and then bring in somebody else and
Yeah.
stop. That's just kind of what they did.
Okay. Yeah, because they're very popular. I mean, I've read a few, and they're really on point. And I mean, out of been many people that have written after. I mean, it's just a hard character to nail down, and you definitely did. So,
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate
yeah,
that.
And the Union trilogy is such a fan favorite
yeah,
that there's many of us in the community that I see them posting all the time, like, "Hey, I'm taking a flight and I'm rereading for the third time Raymond Benson's Union trilogy."
yeah.
I wanted to ask you about that. Was when you came up with that, was it gonna be a trilogy? Was that always like the plan? And
Yeah, it kind of was. I mean, I wanted a villainous organization, kind of like Spectre, but I didn't want to use Spectre.
Mhm.
I kind of experimented with it in the second book, The Facts of Death. There was this group called the Decada, but they were very small, very uh, located, only in Greece. And but then for the next one, I wanted a more global union. And I didn't want to use Spectre because I look at Spectre as being very white collar, very,
Mhm.
a bunch of rich guys. They're
Mhm.
all very wealthy.
Yeah.
I wanted the Union to be more working class.
Hmm.
mm,
It's kind of almost like, mobsters in a way, but more organized like Spectre,
Yeah.
yeah,
um, with a leader and all that, and working worldwide. and being work for hire.
Hmm.
They had no, just like Spectre, but you could hire them to do your dirty work.
Oh, that's cool.
So it was more of a blue collar organization. And then when I started the outlining, at first I didn't think it was going to be a trilogy, but when I started outlining it, and by the time I'd come to the end of the outline, I put that idea past Peter Jansen Smith. I said, can I make this a trilogy? What do you think of that? Bring these guys back and keep it kind of going. And he said, great,
Okay.
do it. So that's how it happened.
What was it like wording
I mean,
work? Oh, no, sorry. Go ahead.
well,
Sorry.
I was going to say I
Yeah.
didn't know what the second and third books were going to be.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I just knew they would. I just knew that the Union would be in all three books, and that the leader, Legeron, would be the guy, sort of the main villain, just like Blofeld was,
Mhm.
in Fleming books.
Was Peter Jansen Smith like what was he like to work with? Like because
Oh, he
he
was.
was there from the start, so so
Yeah, yeah, no, he was fantastic.
yeah.
I mean, Fleming was not his only
Hmm.
big client. I mean, he worked with Eric Ambler. He sold Anthony Burgess's Clockwork
Oh
Orange.
wow, okay.
Yeah, Anthony Burgess was his client for a while. He worked on Winnie the Pooh,
Oh, he did.
Ah,
Wow. Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
uh, Georgette Heyer. Uh, I can't remember it. Yeah, I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of people. So he was a giant in the field of literary agents in England.
Hmm.
He really was. And he was a great editor. I mean, he was a great idea man.
mm,
And if he saw something that he really didn't like, he would tell you. But I never had any real issues. I mean, I never had an outline rejected.
Okay.
mm.
Um, there may have been some suggestions here and there, like, well, this little bit here, maybe, I don't know, change that a little bit. But overall, he was great. And the team that was working there at Glidrose, Ian Fleming Publications at that time, it's a whole different team now.
Yeah,
Mm.
I was gonna ask about that. What brought you back? Because your new novel comes out this week. So, well, the first part does, but if you
Yeah,
could talk a
yeah,
bit about
yesterday.
that, yeah, if you could talk a bit about that, we'd love to talk about it. So,
Yeah, the hook in the eye. Well,
yeah.
I've always wanted to do a Felix Leiter story because,
Mhm.
for one thing, um,
Well, you're
I
both
don't think the
Texas
movie.
guys.
Yeah, well, he is a Texan, and I'm a Texan.
Yeah.
That's why he appealed to me. Even in the books, he
Mhm.
appealed to me. I don't want to disparage any of the actors who played Felix in the movies, but they were all different. They were all
Yeah.
totally different. They were not, it wasn't consistent.
No.
They all had different tone
Yeah.
and the way they acted and presented. I don't think, there was not much care in the filmmakers in presenting a Felix Leiter that was faithful to the books.
Mhm.
In fact, I don't think we've ever seen Fleming's Felix in the movies ever.
No.
No, no, I don't think so either. Yeah.
And especially notwithstanding the prosthesis,
Hmm.
because in most of the books that Felix appears in, he's got a hook for
Hmm.
his, a prosthesis for his hand and leg. And
Hmm.
we never see that. And I think that's a vital part of his character. I mean,
Hmm.
he's in the first two books without it,
Yeah.
but then from then on, he's got a prosthesis. And I think it really makes a difference. But also, he's such a buoyant character. He's so happy-go-lucky and upbeat in the books. He and Bond have this bond of being drinking buddies, meal buddies, and joke, kind of kidding each other all the time. In Diamonds Are Forever, when Felix first appears, Bond is on the streets of New York and he's looking in a window or something, and he feels like what feels like a gun in the back of his back. And it turns out it's Felix sticking his hook in his back and he's saying, "Stick him up, buddy." He's
Yeah.
playing a joke on him. You don't see that in the movies.
No, you don't.
Um,
No. I feel
and
like Jack
so,
Wade was kind of close in
yeah,
in being
and at
the book Felix.
the time I was going, why are they calling him Jack Wade? Why didn't they just make him Felix
Yeah.
Leiter?
I think it was in
but
the continuity of the movies because they didn't want to have him with a hook. That was my guess. I don't know.
Hmm.
So
well, probably
Would have been
so.
great.
yeah, yeah, because he didn't appear again until Craig. Until Craig
Yeah.
did, because that was a reboot, so they didn't have to have
Yeah,
that problem. So
right, right. So, I'd always wanted to explore that, and I had actually pitched it a couple of times to Ian Fleming Publications over the years, and
Hmm.
it just wasn't in their plan
mhm,
at the time. But lately, they have been doing some spin-off stuff,
mhm.
like the Double O Agent books by Kim
Hmm.
Sherwood, and there's a Q novel coming out
Yeah, I read about that.
this
Yeah.
year uh, by Vasim Khan. And so I thought, well, maybe they'll be open to this. So I did pitch it, and they went, yeah, we're interested because they were looking to do some kind of serial for their website
Oh, that's
and to
cool.
bring more, you know, more traffic to their website. And they thought a Felix thing would be, you know, the right ticket, I guess. So I did a proposal and I really wanted to set it in Fleming's timeline,
Mhm,
set it in between, set it right after, he lost his arm.
Hmm.
So we learned, what happened, how about his rehabilitation, getting fitted for the prosthesis, how he loses his job at the CIA and joins Pinkerton's detective agency, which is what he's working for when Bond meets him again in
Yeah.
mhm,
Diamonds Are Forever.
mhm.
So this is his first Pinkerton's job before
Oh,
Diamonds Are
cool.
Forever. And
Nice.
so the fun of it was not only, exploring Felix's character, but also digging into the research, the period research of the era of the early 50s. And
W-
it was great fun.
Were you able to put Easter eggs in for fans? Any little
Oh
thing?
yes.
Yeah, yeah, okay,
Oh
yeah.
yes. There's plenty of those. I don't know. Have you read the first episode yet?
No,
Not yet.
I've been no, but I intend to though.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, well, there's already some Easter eggs in that
Okay,
people
well
are
I will.
seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I really wrote it for. I I think anybody can enjoy it, but I really wrote it for the Fleming fans, the people
Mhm.
who know the books. Um, that's who it's really aimed at.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are really gonna get a kick out of it, I think.
Yeah. We we had a talk we have a film night and we Richard Shankman was our guest last night
Oh yeah.
actually. Yeah, and he was
Oh, he and
wonderful.
I go way back.
Yeah, you did Bondage. Can you talk a bit about that? Like how you got hooked up with him on Bondage?
Sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
if you don't
I
mind.
met him.
Yeah.
I met him for the first time in, I think, 81.
Okay.
There was one of these sort of Bond fan conventions going on in New York City, and I had just decided to start doing this book, The Bedside Companion.
Yeah.
And so I was already, doing research for it, and I saw that there was this convention. I thought, oh, I better go to that. And he had his own table. Had his, fan club table there.
Oh
And I
wow.
introduced myself to him, and I said, well, I'm writing a book, about it. And he's, oh, yeah, okay, sure. Because you hear that a lot
Yeah.
when
Yeah, I'm
people come
sure.
up
Yeah.
and say, "Oh, I'm writing a book about
Yeah.
James Bond." But I stayed in touch with him, and he really saw that I was really doing it,
Yeah.
and we became friends. And I think he made me vice president even before the book came out.
Oh wow. Okay.
It was around 82 or 83 that he said, "Would you like to be vice president of the fan club?" I said, "Sure." And by then, I was contributing articles to Bondage magazine
Yeah.
and we became good friends. And we were friends all through the 80s. And I left New York around in 1990, and I think he did too. Around that time, he moved west to
Hmm.
to LA.
Yeah.
Um, but we've still been friends. Sometimes when I go to LA, we get together.
Okay. Yeah, he's a super nice guy. I asked
Yeah.
him this question, but I'll ask you that. What do you think Fleming would make of everything that has happened in the time that since he's been gone? Like, what do you think he would make of all this?
Oh, he'd be delighted.
Yeah,
He would just he'd be having a ball. He'd
yeah,
be laughing and he would just be saying, "Oh, well, isn't that wonderful?" Pointing at different, toys or whatever,
yeah.
and saying, "Isn't that fun?" He'd probably be collecting it all. You know, I
Probably.
don't, you know,
I love
what
that
I
idea.
don't know what he would have thought of some of the movies, but
Yeah.
but
I would love to
I
watch
think he would have.
Moonraker with him.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, I'm sure he would have. You know, he would
Had
have.
some
I
thoughts.
know he was very happy with the first two movies that he saw.
Yeah.
It's a shame that he didn't get to see the huge success that Goldfinger brought.
Yeah.
I mean, I often wonder because I mean, I at the end of his life, he seemed kind of burnt out for health reasons and whatnot. But I wonder, had he not died, would he have just kept writing like all the Bond books that we didn't get? Would they have gone on, or would
Well,
he have moved on? I
if
don't know.
I think if he had been in good health,
Yeah,
it, it would have been a different story.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and he would have seen, the success
yeah.
that Goldfinger and Thunderball brought. Huge. Thunderball was huge, huge, huge.
Yeah.
That was, one of the biggest movies of the '60s.
Thunderball's great. I love
Um,
Thunderball.
Yeah.
and it was Bond mania at
Hmm.
its peak. And so if he had been in the middle of that, he would have just been basking in
Hmm.
the limelight of being the famous author,
Yeah,
with
yeah,
his
Yeah.
cigarette
yeah.
holder and everything. He would have been playing it up. He
Oh,
he
yeah.
would have been playing the role with relish. Believe
Oh,
me.
All
Yeah.
those pictures are great. The ones when he's playing cards or like chips with somebody. It's just all these
Yeah.
atmospheric photos. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
when you write like your new novel, how much like I mean, you're obviously influenced by him, but how much of it is you, and how much is it what you're trying to? I mean, like him. Like, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, a lot of it is me,
Yeah.
especially Felix.
Yeah.
I mean, I am a Texan, and I knew, I've known men like him. Um, the book is written in first person, so there's
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of my voice in it.
hmm.
Um, but it is very. I really try to bring in Fleming's sensibilities,
Hmm.
especially in terms of plot and story. Some of the more maybe outlandish
Hmm.
things that do happen because it's very Fleming-esque.
Hmm.
He once said, this is a quote that he said, "I don't mind if my plots are improbable as long as no one thinks they're impossible."
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. That's a good
You
one.
know, so there's a little bit of that.
Hmm.
And he really liked the bizarre and
Hmm.
the grotesque and even the sleazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Um,
for sure. Yeah.
and so I'm trying to bring some of that into it as well.
That's all part of the
I
fun
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
of that world,
Even with my
that
Bond,
mixture, that cocktail.
even with my Bond novels, I tried to do the kinds of plots that Fleming would have,
Hmm.
come up with
Yeah.
himself.
I have a question. You mentioned earlier that the Felixes in the movies weren't really Fleming's Felix, and if you were to choose an actor, living or dead, that would be your perfect Felix, who would it be?
Oh, gee. Well, I'm not really supposed to say modern actors like
Yeah.
today
Hmm.
who I would cast as Felix because then, the tabloids would go, Raymond Benson thinks so and so should be
Yeah,
Felix
they're
Leiter,
gonna
and then
latch
it
onto
would
it.
be all
Yeah,
Yeah.
over
your
the
phone's
place,
gonna
and
be blowing up.
that actor's agent would be calling Amazon and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Is this
So I'm not even
true?
supposed to. Yeah, I'm not even supposed to go there. I think back in say the '90s, let's
Mhm.
say.
Mhm.
I would have gone with somebody like Dennis Quaid
Hmm. That's good.
or Matthew McConaughey.
Hmm.
Ah, yeah,
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, but they're too old now.
Yeah, they are.
yeah.
Yeah. So,
uh,
um, I I'll go ahead and say I like Rick Van Nutter.
mhm.
I think he was
Yeah.
close. He was the closest physically to
Hmm.
Fleming's Felix. With
Mhm.
the blonde hair and everything. Tall blonde guy. Uh,
It always amazed me that they had no obligation to continuity because the actors were so
Yeah.
wildly off the mark at times. It's like they just didn't care. I mean, it's just like, I mean,
I also heard too that when I forget the actor's name, and Goldfinger escapes me, that plays
Cease
Felix.
Linder.
yeah,
Cease
Cecily,
Yeah.
yeah,
So they said that somebody had mentioned, I think it might have been Calvin Dyson in one of his videos. They went, "Oh, you got this real good-looking guy in Doctor No, who's kind of like an American Bond," and then they didn't want to overshadow Bond by having like a sort of like his like kind of equal. So they have somebody who looks like his dad show up instead.
yeah, he's
I
older.
know.
And
Well,
yeah,
Cease Linder was not that much older than Connery.
Oh, really? Oh,
mm,
He
okay.
just, yeah, no, he wasn't.
I didn't know that.
He
Yeah,
just kind of looked older.
yeah,
But Cease Linder kind of had the tone. He
hmm
kind of was jokey,
yeah,
buoyant. He always had a
yeah,
smile. That's my James. That kind of.
yeah.
So he kind of had the attitude. He just didn't kind of look like him. Jack Lord, I believe, was cast because he looked like Kennedy.
Mm,
mm,
yeah.
He was very much a Kennedy type.
He did look
In
yeah.
like that. Yeah,
1961, 62, that
yeah,
Oh
was
yeah.
that was that was the end thing.
yeah,
And with Kennedy kind of putting saying, "Oh, From Russia with Love" is
yeah.
one of my favorite books, and
Exactly.
that whole thing with that that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Was it fun to come back into Bond?
Oh
I would,
yeah,
yeah, I
no,
would
it's
think
been
it was.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's been. This was a project I wanted to do really,
yeah,
really badly. So it's been great fun, and the new team at Ian Fleming Publications, they're wonderful.
that's good.
Um, they're great to work with. We're having a blast.
Yeah, yeah, they definitely seem like they have like a strong idea of what they want for the
Mhm.
novels, and it looks super. So yeah,
It's
it looks great.
it's working too.
Yeah,
People are
yeah,
really digging it. People are
yeah,
really getting
Yeah,
into it, and
yeah. Yeah, and I think they're reaching, younger
hmm
readers and stuff, which is important,
yeah,
mm,
definitely.
going forward.
Yeah, 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 because young people are going to make it happen. I
yeah,
mean, so we definitely
they're going to
need
keep
it.
Yeah,
the fandom going.
Yeah,
After a
yeah.
while, there's not going to be too many of
yeah.
us, talking about
Well,
Roger Moore and
no, no, no.
why
Um,
I was doing.
yeah, it's like, what do you, not to put you on the spot, but what's your take on the shakeup with the films, and where do you foresee as the future? I mean, you probably, I don't want to, it's up
I
to
want
you.
to, I want to be optimistic.
Yeah, same
I
here.
have to be. I mean, how
Yeah,
can you not be?
yeah,
Um, Anybody who just kind of goes doom and gloom
yeah.
doesn't know what they're talking about
It's been very prominent in that as
because
of
we don't
late.
know. We don't
Yeah,
Yeah.
know anything. We don't know
yeah,
what's going to happen.
I have a
So why
feeling they
not be
won't enjoy
optimistic?
whatever happens, no matter how good it is,
I
because they've
know.
already convinced themselves
Yeah,
that I'm not going to like this.
Exactly, exactly. You got to be optimistic. I'm eager to see what they're going to do. I
yeah, me
want to
too.
see what they're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. You
hmm
know,
Yeah, I mean, there's been a drought, so my first reaction was like shock, and then I was like, well, that means there'll be a brand new film soon. So I'm very happy about that. So hopefully it'll be good. But all the team they put in place are really accomplished people. So I mean, it's going
oh,
to be,
the
yeah,
producers, I
yeah,
think. Right.
yeah.
Has it been confirmed that Cuarón is the director?
No, he's he
No.
Yeah, that's just a rumor. That's just a
he
Yeah.
rumor.
he allegedly gave a film talk somewhere where someone was in the audience and said that he basically hinted this is going to be my next project, but it's not confirmed, so I don't
Yeah,
really know.
yeah,
But he's been vying for that for a long time, so
yeah.
maybe.
Well,
So
I think the producers are good choices.
yeah,
Yeah.
But I know Barbara, I know Michael. They're great people, and
hmm
they were great stewards
Oh,
of
they
the
great
franchise.
work. Yeah, wonderful.
They kept the quality control very, very high, and they knew how to make Bond films. So,
Yeah,
you know,
And I
they
love
people
that
definitely
it
have,
did.
was a family business really for so long,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
for
yeah.
over 60 years, and especially in the entertainment industry where, I mean, that's a hell of a run.
yeah, it
It
is.
really
It's
is.
very
Well,
rare.
the Eon Productions Bond films was the longest running, most successful film franchise made by one production company, second to Godzilla.
Wow,
Yeah.
that I didn't know, but yeah, that does make sense. Wow. So, but I think it's. Some people got mad. I mean, a lot of fandom got mad, but my thought was like, let's just applaud them because this is
Yeah.
like a record run, and job well done. I mean,
Yeah,
exactly.
You know, um, will you come back to Bond? Is there anything in the pipeline that you can talk about, or you don't know? Okay, there you go. So
I don't know. I don't know. I'm just concentrating on getting the Felix out now to
okay,
the world and
yeah.
seeing what happens. Yeah.
Do you have any non-Bond projects that you'd like to talk about, or
Well, I've done, my own thrillers and
yeah?
mysteries, in the interim and stuff. I had a book just a couple of years ago called The Mad Mad Murders of Marigold Way
Okay,
that
yeah.
got a lot of attention because it's a darkly comic murder mystery that takes place during the first couple of months of COVID.
Oh wow, okay.
Oh,
Nice.
So that kind
That's a
of
good setting. Yeah.
informs how the characters act
mm.
because COVID's in the background.
Mhm.
And I used as an inspiration, the Coen brothers tone and how they do murder mysteries because they are funny.
Mhm.
They are kind of dark comedies,
Yeah.
like Fargo, and they're always about, stupid criminals,
Mhm.
criminals that are really, really stupid. The
That's
Coen
funny.
brothers make smart movies about stupid people.
That's yeah.
That's I've never
That's a
thought of
good
that.
summation
Great.
right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Do you have anything, Steve? Is there any more questions you may have?
No, I Raymond, thank you so much.
No, this is great.
This
I
was
appreciate
fantastic. It was
it.
so
Oh,
much
you
fun to
bet.
talk to you.
Yeah, we're just
Yeah,
happy
yeah.
for new Bond stuff, and we're happy
Yeah.
you're back in Bond. It's just, it's really a good time. It's a good. I feel the Bond wave is like rising up now, so
Yeah.
it's
With
good.
the
Oh,
movies
yeah.
ramping up and
And
then
books,
this whole
yeah.
world in the publication arena too. The James Bond feels very robust
Yes, it does. So,
suddenly. And
yeah.
Right. Yeah. I should mention that all summer, Ian Fleming Publications will be adding little extras related to my Felix
Oh,
book.
cool.
oh,
Nice.
great.
There's going to be little essays and
Oh, sweet.
other videos from me. Like, well, yesterday there was a video of me reading chapter one.
Okay.
But there's
Oh,
going to be little videos after each episode drops, a week after each episode
Oh, that's
of
cool.
sort of an unpacking the episode
I'll have to check
video
it
oh,
out.
kind of
nice.
thing and stuff like that. And
That's fun. Yeah,
Oh, we're
it's
looking
good.
forward to that.
Yeah.
yeah.
Mr. Raymond Benson, thank you. We really appreciate this. So
Cheers, sir.
Thanks
thanks
for
a lot.
having me on.
Yeah, of
All
course.
right.
Thank you.